Hi everyone, in today's lore video I'm going to explore how realistic is Astra Militarum artillery. I've done a whole series of videos exploring this type of thing, and check out this playlist here to see other things I've explored, such as the Cadian war gear or the Chimera armoured transport. Like those videos, I'll draw on my experience as a former rifleman in the Australian Army. Being a grunt, I never worked directly with artillery, but utilised the full array of infantry weapons from the small pistols through to heavy machine guns and rocket launchers. So before we dive into the 41st millennium, let's understand what artillery is and the role it plays on the battlefield. With origins dating back to the medieval era, artillery is a broad definition for weapons able to propel munitions well beyond the range of normal infantry weapons. They are typically a lot larger than anything I used during my service, and often able to strike targets that are obscured from view either because of distance or blocked by terrain. It encompasses shell-fired guns, howitzers, mortars, and rocket artillery. They are typically less accurate than direct-fire weapons, with environmental factors like windage having greater effect, given the great distance the projectile travels. There have been recent technological developments to assist with accuracy, and we can definitely assume in the 41st millennium, the Adeptus Mechanicus has developed some techno-sorcery to assist us here. The range of these weapon platforms range from about 5 kilometres for an 81mm mortar, 24 kilometres for a 155mm howitzer, or a wild 300 kilometres for the MLRS M270, firing guided rockets with GPS guided systems, flight control and rocket engines getting them directly to their target. The role of these weapons is to provide close support to frontline elements engaging with the enemy, or striking enemy positions further in behind enemy lines. They either suppress the enemy or destroy them using high explosive rounds that pepper an area with shrapnel, or less commonly cluster style rounds that open mid-air, releasing numerous smaller munitions that blanket an area, being lethally effective against exposed infantry. Put very crudely, they're weapons which can strike an enemy at a great distance with an inherent protection for the firer, given their miles behind the front line. Having never been under artillery barrage, I did experience all manner of high explosives, with even the humble hand grenade producing a sizable concussion when detonated close by. Having artillery, on the other hand, land nearby would be incredibly distracting, and if not already within cover, would have you diving for any that is available. As the tragedy of the Ukraine war illustrates, artillery is a crucial element of warfare, with whichever side having a consistent supply of ammunition for their guns having the upper hand, being able to suppress enemy movement, keep their heads down, or respond to attacks on sections of the front line with close fire support. It can have a devastating effect on infantry, causing horrendous injuries either via shrapnel slicing its way through internal organs, decapitating entire limbs, or blowing whole bodies to pieces if a direct hit is scored. We'll get onto this point later in the video, but having more less accurate guns is probably better than having fewer more accurate ones, as there's a certain quality to quantity. Sure, a less accurate gun won't individually consistently hit their target, but find others, say 4 of them at the same time, at the same target, one will eventually hit, and also those in the target area will feel that the apocalypse has started. To use an actual Astra Militarum quote, infantry win firefights, tanks win battles, and artillery wins wars. So with a theoretical and modern era perspective established, let's now turn our attention to the grimdark future. But in 39,000 years away, warfare hasn't actually changed a whole lot, with the Astra Militarum still employing massed artillery to flatten the enemies of the Imperium. Within its arsenal is a broad spectrum of platforms. Starting with the towed platforms, we've got the Bombast field gun, Earthshaker carriage battery, and Medusa carriage battery. The self-propelled, aka mobile artillery, is the Basilisk, Manticore, Wyvern, Collus Bombard, and the Praeter armoured assault launcher. Note, for this video, I'm only reviewing those models and units that are allowed within the current rules of 10th edition of 40k. Understand the difference in towed versus mobile artillery comes a lot down to the intended purpose of the platform and cost to produce them. Towed artillery is typically more simple to manufacture, and therefore many more can be produced cheaper. It takes a bit more time to deploy the platform and would suit fixed firing positions. Being towed, you can get into any position that a vehicle can get into, and even being dropped off by aircraft given it's comparatively lighter than a vehicle-mounted artillery system. Also, being towed means it could be even dragged by troops if the terrain was even too arduous for tracked vehicles. Thinking back to my service in the army, would often be tasked with carrying all manner of ridiculous items like telegraph poles, fuel jerrys, and oil drums up and down hills and through the forest, illustrating that when motivated, you could move pretty much anything with a bunch of blokes. So dragging an Earthshaker carriage battery up a mountain wouldn't be outside the remit of the Astra Militarum. On the other hand, mobile artillery is comparatively more expensive to manufacture, given it's got an armoured vehicle attached to it, which therefore means you may have less of them available than towed artillery, given resource constraints, which would even be a consideration for the limitless resources of the Imperium of mankind. This additional cost does, however, provide several benefits. Having its own transport system, with the gun often in a near ready-to-fire condition, means it could quickly deploy, pop up its fire mission before redeploying, and removing the chance of counter-battery fire. Otherwise known as shoot and scoot, it allows artilleryans to reconnoiter to the battlefield, giving commanders a lot more flexibility than a static fixed artillery platform. Also, being mounted on an armoured vehicle does provide a degree of protection from small and medium arms and the shrapnel from artillery barrages. They can also mount medium direct fire weapons, giving the crew a further degree of self-defence, although if your artillery units are needed to defend themselves, then the battle is probably lost. We can also assume the vehicle can carry sufficient ammunition for several fire missions, whilst towed artillery would naturally need supporting vehicles to transport its ammunition. All in all, towed artillery is cheaper and can therefore be fielded in greater numbers and would suit fixed fire positions, for example in siege warfare or static defence. Whilst self-propelled artillery is more expensive to produce and has a shoot and scoot ability, giving commanders a greater degree of tactical flexibility. Another platform that we can't forget is the trusty Mortar. The distinction between Mortar and its larger siblings is primarily driven by the size of the weapon. Whilst the Earthshaker or Manticore Storm Eagle rockets require a vehicle to transport their immense weight, a mortar is man-portable. The term man-portable is an ambiguous one, however. For example, the before-mentioned 81mm mortar weighs 40 kilos, including its base plate. With a crew of 3, lugging this thing around would be an absolute bastard. During my service, I qualified on the Mag 58 machine gun, fielded from tripod and with aiming device. Part of the course required us to do a route march with a weapon, tripod and ammunition, and the weight was incredible. We were carrying 7.62mm belts of ammunition, and with each mortar round for the 81mm weighing a whopping 4 kilos, the 3-man crew would be significantly burdened with the load up of mortar components, their normal individual weapons, standard equipment, body armour, and plus 1 or 2 rounds of ammunition. The rest of the ammunition for fire missions would be carried either by vehicles, if possible, or by the guardsmen supporting the units, each being lucky enough to add 4 kilos of mortar rounds to their equipment. Yippee. Now, truly pivoting to how realistic all these weapons are, looking at the miniature for the mortar team, we can assume this is a smaller one compared to the 81mm mortar, being maybe close to the 60mm mortar, which is significantly lighter, with a weapon system weighing about 20 kilos and each round only weighing 1.4 kilos. This obviously makes it much more manageable for the crew. However, perhaps the least realistic of the Astra Militarum mortar team is the fact that the crew is only 2 blokes. At a minimum, I expect 3, as this would allow for a gunner, assistance gunner, and either a tube commander or spare body to carry around ammunition depending on command structure. Now back onto the towed weapons, being the Bombast field gun, Earthshaker carriage battery and Medusa carriage battery. The Bombast looks similar to a light artillery piece, perhaps similar to a 105 howitzer, whilst the Earthshaker similar to 155. Principally, the aesthetic of both are fine, with a somewhat adequate amount of crewmen, and we'd assume the gun has an inbuilt dampener to absorb recoil. What is a problem, however, is that there's no firing platform or base plate, and the road wheels or travel wheels are deployed downwards. Having the road wheels deployed downwards could create a situation when the gun is fired that it either slides back or rocks on these wheels. Modern artillery systems have a base plate that allows the gun to be rotated with the road wheels lifted. The Bombast field gun also lacks spades, aka anchors, that are buried into the ground to maintain the platform's position during sustained firing. The Earthshaker at least has these, and also has a nice detail being the steel curved running sheets that would allow the gun to be rotated if it did have a base plate. The Bombast also has a crewman oddly positioned right behind the gun operating two handles. Given the nature of firing, he would only be making minor adjustments in between firing, so having a dedicated seat for him to do so would be lazy and unnecessary. Now, the same observations I've just looked at apply also to the Medusa carriage battery. Intended as a short-range, highly devastating weapon, there aren't really any modern-day equivalents that I know of. Its intended use would probably be siege work, given its shorter range would place the crew and gun weapon system within greater risk of enemy counter-battery fire or infantry attacks. One thing to consider for the Medusa is that its heavy shells would greatly slow its rate of fire, given moving one of these monster shells up from the storage crate on the ground into the breech of the weapon would take a lot of effort. Perhaps the crew just requisitioned Ograms to help them out to do this. Okay, now to the mobile artillery. Firstly, something that I've mentioned in all other videos is the ridiculously low side armour plates of the Chimera chassis. This means the vehicle would have zero suspension, making for a very uncomfortable journey and probably damaging the vehicle when traversing over rough terrain. That aside, the Basilisk is a bit of an oddity by modern self-propelled artillery systems, given it doesn't have an auto loader, instead having space for the crew to load, aim, fire the gun. Its exposed crew section would prevent my initial commentary about crew protection, with a more important subtle note being that the crew would be exposed to any weather conditions as opposed to modern artillery systems, where some have got the crew fully enclosed in a nice dry, warm and hopefully well-fed cabin. The Collus is a strange platform with a rear spade at least to anchor it against what we assume is a huge recoil, given the shells it fires requires a crane to load it into place. It's got no self-defense medium weapon, which implies it will probably be used only in highly deliberate situations, as opposed to the Basilisk that at least has a heavy bolter or heavy flamer to defend itself, either when moving about or if attacked when it's firing its main weapon. Now, the Manticore is equipped with 4 Storm Eagle rockets. Despite being called rockets, they're actually self-guided, highly accurate, and capable of delivering different warheads than just the popular Storm Eagle. The sheer size of each rocket implies they've got a very long range, and an interesting quirk within the tabletop game is that the Manticore has got a range of 120 inches and the Basilisk 240 inches. This should be the other way around, with the Manticore having a far longer range, given comparable modern rocket systems have got a much longer range than howitzers do. Also, we can assume each rocket requires a huge degree of manufacturing investment, and given only 4 are mounted on the Manticore and reloading would require a crane, their use would be carefully planned. The crew are fully enclosed in the cabin, and this makes sense given any targeting systems would be managed on a single dashboard style setup, with firing coordinates provided by artillery forward observers, special forces like Scions or Khazrakans, or the Imperial Navy in high orbit using advanced optics. The law of the Manticore also states that it's a highly temperamental weapon system that needs constant appeasement of its machine spirit by a supporting tech priest. By modern standards, such an unreliable weapon would never make it to the battlefront, failing the usually rigorous procurement process most militaries employ before selecting weapons and equipment to purchase. This, of course, however, is the grim dark future, where despite the fact that mankind is spread across the galaxy, understanding of some technologies is lost to mankind and the toaster boys of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Right, lastly is the Praetor Armored Assault Launcher. The miniature is twice the size of the Manticore, with its rocket slightly longer. They can engage both air and land targets, which implies a huge degree of sophistication in each missile, with several different warheads available. Like the Manticore, this means its use would be only against high value targets due to the high manufacturing cost of each missile. Also, being a missile implies its range would be even greater than the Manticore's rockets. This further supports my assumption they would be highly expensive to manufacture and used only against highly strategic targets. Given its enormous range, we can then ask if there is any requirement for the 2 heavy bolters on the Praetor, given the chance of the Praetor ever seeing the enemy eye to eye should be minimal. Like I've explored in previous videos, bolting on weapons for the sake of it, whilst looking cool, isn't necessarily something that would be done. Any weapon system costs resources to produce, alongside its ammunition. The crew needs to maintain and secure the weapon, and would the 2 heavy bolters on the Praetor ever actually fire a shot at anger? I'd actually assume not, although the 41st millennium is a wild place, where even those well behind the front lines could be threatened by enemy which teleport into existence, such as Chaos Space Marines or Necrons, arriving out of nowhere to ruin everyone's day. So in summary, Astra Militarum artillery is overall pretty realistic, using the benchmark of today's weapon systems, albeit with some design flaws in some of the miniatures, which is pretty normal for Games Workshop miniatures. As said at the start of the video, I never served in the artillery, and if you are or were a gunner, let me know your opinion on the matter, or where I've made any fundamental mistakes in my analysis, as I'd love to honestly hear from you. So yeah, what do you think of Astra Militarum artillery? And if you enjoyed this video and want to show me some love, you can do so via a like, comment, or sharing the video, or subscribing to the channel, as it all helps the YouTube algorithm. And it also inspires me to produce more content. I work a pretty busy job and I've got a little 1-year-old daughter, so getting time for videos can be sometimes tough. But as a loyal servant of the Emperor, I will endure. Much love to my Patreon platoon members, whose support I greatly appreciate. So get your bayonet sharp, lads got Nord. Faith for the Emperor strong. Patreon platoon, sound off. Tank Commander Glenn. Tank Commander Watchdog Van Etten. Tank Commander Mitchell. Lieutenant Burke Nielsen. Lieutenant Smith. Colour Sergeant DuPont. Sergeant Adal. Scott. The Colonel Merrill. Veteran Gibson. Hall. Lundeen. Guardsman Beard, Coquelin, Flint, Hills, Malik, Nitton, Nguyen, Tom, Tompkin, Conscript de Paz, England, Evan Gunn, Gillian, Goodwin, King.